And I'm the director of the Oklahoma Alliance for Geographic. Today we have Teresa Potter joining us, who is an OCAGE teacher consultant and a National Geographic certified educator. Teresa is currently an instructional coach at Kenneth Cooper Middle School in the Putnam City School District, and she will be leading a discussion today about oil, religion, and the Middle East. We'll have some time at the end of today's presentation for questions and discussion. And please also feel free to drop a question in the chat box if you think of anything while Teresa is talking today. And after the session, we'll have this lesson plan available on our website. And if you'll stick around for a few minutes after the session, I'll go over all the information about the PD certificates and along with some of our upcoming opportunities. And we'll also do a door prize drawing for 5 Nystrom atlases. So Teresa, as soon as you're ready, I'll turn it over to you. And I will be sharing my screen for Teresa's presentation, and she'll be telling me when to advance the slides. So Teresa, are you ready for me to share the presentation?
Sure. Hi,
Okay.
everybody. I'm Teresa, so I'll be your presenter today. And I'm excited to be with you. And I want to thank you also for being here with us today. It really shows your dedication to teaching for taking the time out of your busy schedules. I know, especially in this time of craziness of COVID, everybody's constantly dealing with changes. So I appreciate you. All right, let's get started. The title of my lesson is Oil, Religion, and the Global Landscape. I became interested in this topic when my husband deployed to Afghanistan and Iraq. He just came back from his 4th deployment this past year in August. So, Becca, if you'll go ahead and advance the slide. These are the Oklahoma academic standards for social studies that we'll be focusing on. And go ahead to the next one. And the geographic themes that we'll concentrate on today are place and regions, how cooperation and conflict among people contribute to political, economic, and social divisions of Earth's surfaces. Go ahead to the next one. When I start the lesson, I pass out a KWLH chart to my students and have them complete the first 2. You guys have this or will have access to this in like a packet that I gave to Becca for the lesson. In the first column, I ask them to write down everything that they know about the Middle East. I tell them that they can write, and it has to be in sentence format. They can write anything that they know about the customs there, what people eat, what regions they live in, or what countries are over there, what landforms are there, just anything at all that they know about the war. Once they've completed that, then they write 5 questions for me of what they want to know as we're progressing through the lesson. And then once we've completed the lesson, they'll write down 5 sentences of things that they've learned, and then also how they learned. Did they learn from the PowerPoint? Did they learn from the video that's embedded in the PowerPoint, from my teacher presentation, or from student discussion that we also have throughout the lesson? Okay, Becca. So let's get started. Where is the Middle East? The Middle East is where Africa and Europe meet. Today, they are all part of Asia. Greater Middle East includes all countries on the map, to the left, including Afghanistan and Pakistan, and all the other stands, but it also includes many North Africa countries, including Egypt, Libya, and Sudan. Go ahead to the next one. On this map of world commodities, every country is labeled with its most valuable export. So you can see how important it is to the Middle East. We had some technological difficulties with me sharing, so Becca is advancing to the next slide. Go ahead to the next one. The Middle East produces about 1/3 of the world's oil and 1/10 of its natural gas. Much of that is exported. That makes the entire world economy pretty reliant on the continued flow of the oil and natural gas that's there. which just happens to go through that region that has seen an awful lot of conflict in the last few decades. This map shows where the reserves are and how oil and natural gas are transported over land. Much of it also goes by sea through the Persian Gulf, a body of water that is also home to some of the largest reserves in the region and to the world. The energy resources are heavily clustered in 3 neighboring countries that have historically hated one another: Iran, Iraq, and Saudi Arabia. The tension between these 3 countries is something that the United States, as a huge energy importer, has been deeply interested in for years. It sided against Iran during the Iran-Iraq War in the 1980s, against Iraq when it invaded Kuwait and threatened Saudi Arabia in the 1990s, again against Iraq with the 2003 invasion, and now is supporting Saudi Arabia in its rapidly worsening proxy war against Iran. Go ahead to the next one. So at this point, I pause with the information that I'm giving the students, and I also pass out this graphic organizer called Abundant Oil Supplies in the Middle East and Global Landscape. And we complete, or I've already put on the handout, the first 2. We take a look at the relative certainties that they've heard from my presentation and the impacts or likely impacts on asking them to make inferences based on those relative certainties. So I've presented and talked to them about the Middle East producing 1/3 of the world's oil. So the impact of that is, or the likely impact of that is, the rest of the world is entirely reliant or reliant on that oil, including the United States. Go ahead to the next slide, Becca. And the other thing that I talked about in my presentation is that the Middle East energy resources are clustering in those 3 neighboring countries who have always hated each other: Iraq, Saudi Arabia, and Iran. And so the impacts of that are that they're always fighting against one another, and the United States seems like they're always involved in those wars. Go ahead to the next slide. Can you go back, or is it skipping? It may be doing what earlier as I was going through it, it kept skipping the map and going on to the video. Yeah. Well, you'll have to take a look at that map. I'm going to talk about it, but you can take a look at that when you get the presentation, or I'm not sure, Becca, are you forwarding that to everyone in an email? Okay. So the map that I'm talking about, you briefly saw that map, but in the map, there are a few grimmer symbols for the devastation of the Iraq War than what it did to Baghdad's neighborhoods. On the left side of the map, it showed the city's religious makeup in 2005. Mixed neighborhoods, which were the norm, were in yellow. And the map on the right showed what it looked like in 2007 after 2 years of Sunni Shia killings, bombings, which were shown in red dots, death squads, and militias. Coerced evictions and thousands of deaths effectively cleansed neighborhoods to be mostly Shia, which are there in blue, and then Sunni, which are there in red. So since late 2012, the civil war has ramped back up in Baghdad and nationwide. Okay, let's go ahead to the video. So I'm going to share a video with you that I've shared with my students. The video goes really fast and he talks really fast, but it gives you a really good, clear picture of what's going on over there in the Middle East. And when I share it with my students, because it does go very quickly, I play it through once for them, and then I play it through a second time and I pause it throughout and talk about it as I'm playing the video. But for the sake of the workshop, we're just going to play it through once and make sure you're paying attention, because we'll use the information to complete the rest of the graphic organizer that I talked about. So go ahead and play the video. We don't have sound.
In 2003, the US invaded Iraq because of its alleged connections to terrorism and weapons of mass destruction. At the time, Saddam Hussein, a brutal dictator, ruled the country. He was part of the Sunni minority and suppressed the Shia majority. Iraq was conquered fairly quickly, but the US had no plan for the country. The until then suppressed Shia majority took over and began oppressing the Sunnis because suppressing other faiths has proven to be such a good idea. Unsurprisingly, a Sunni rebel uprising began and terrorist groups like Al-Qaeda trickled into Iraq, and local forces, often former Sunni military, began fighting the US troops and the newly formed Iraqi state, peaking in a bloody civil war in 2006. Since then, people in Iraq have basically been segregated by religion. So, in a tragic irony of history, the US invasion led to the formation of the very terrorists the US wanted to eliminate in the first place, because Iraq was now the perfect training ground for terrorism. To understand this complicated conflict better, we need to understand the relationship between the two main branches of the Muslim faith, Shia and Sunni Islam. Sunnis make up about 80% of the Muslim world, and Shia about 20%. And the hardliners on both sides don't like each other very much. Saudi Arabia and Iran are the two most powerful players in the game of faiths. They both have no separation of state and religion, domestic problems, and a lot of oil money. And they support groups that fight the other religious orientation. And one of those terror organizations supported by Saudi Arabia was the Islamic State in Iraq, or ISI for short. In 2010, the Arab Spring happened and changed the whole situation in the Middle East. In Syria, dictator Bashir al-Assad didn't think much of resigning and started a gruesome civil war against his own people. The longer the war went on, the more foreign groups joined the fight, most of them for religious reasons and with the goal of building an Islamic State in the region. And one of them was the infamous ISI, which now became the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria, or ISIS. They had fought in Iraq for years and had thousands of well-trained and fanatic soldiers. They already quasi-controlled parts of northern Iraq and were very determined to build their religious state. And they changed the game in Syria like no one expected. ISIS was so unbelievably violent and radical that soon it was at war with almost every other faction of the Syrian rebel armies. They attacked and killed members of other Muslim terrorist groups. In the territories they controlled, they built an Islamic State with rules so strict that even the hardliners of Al-Qaeda and Saudi Arabia were shocked and withdrew their support. ISIS has been accused of responsibility for multiple massacres against civilians, countless suicide bombings, the hostage-taking of women and children, the execution of their prisoners, and beheadings. All kinds of medieval horrors we would rather not have to illustrate. And this lovely gathering of human beings recently decided it was time to take more territory in Iraq. Since the US left Iraq, the Shia Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki has monopolized power and discriminated against Sunnis wherever possible. The government of Iraq is widely regarded as being corrupt, incapable, and it's certainly hated by a large part of its citizens. The Iraqi army, consisting of about 300,000 soldiers, was created using $25 billion in tax money, but it's not loyal to its government and has been withdrawing or completely disbanding, giving up city after city. Because ISIS has announced that everyone who opposes them will be killed, they have proven they mean business. By June 2014, they'd conquered a big chunk of Iraq, including Mosul, Iraq's second largest city. They'd stolen hundreds of millions from captured banks, making them the richest terror organization on earth. And they are constantly working on establishing a super medieval religious state. Iran and the US are even considering working together to fight them. That's how gruesome the situation is. Events in Iraq show again that exploiting the people you've defeated in a war, denying them power, a living and a stake in the rebuilding of the country, is just sowing the seeds of the next bout of violence. Somehow, we have to break this circle.
That's the end of that section. We can go back to the PowerPoint. So be thinking about the certainties and the impacts of what you learned in the video. And we'll come back to that after talking about the next couple slides. Okay, we don't have enough participants to do breakout rooms, but right now use the chat. And well, I thought we were going to do another slide or two, but that's okay. Use the chat and go ahead, and if you were adding to that graphic organizer, what are some certainties that you learned about what's going on in the Middle East? And what are the impacts or likely impacts of those key certainties? Anyone want to be brave and put something in the chat based on what you learned from the video? Okay, new groups emerge to take over the old. Good. And what's the impact of that? You guys are all tired from teaching today.
I can't get onto my chat right now. I am driving, so I'm listening,
If you
just in case you wondered.
Yeah, if you want to just comment, that's good as well.
Well, like I said, the first comment dealing with the transitioning from the past to the new, that's obvious. There's a lot of breakout. So other than that, I can't give you any other clue, but I'm on the interstate, so I better be careful. Thank you.
Yeah. All right, let's go on to the next slide, and then we'll come back and discuss what you learned in the video. Get rid of my chat. Okay. As we know, on September 11th, 2001, members of Al-Qaeda hijacked 4 of our planes. They crashed 2 into the World Trade Center and another into the Pentagon. The terrorists were supported by Taliban, who ruled Afghanistan in the 1990s and allowed Al-Qaeda to hide out there. The terrorists believe that everyone should be Muslim and that non-believers should be a target of violence. They attack symbols of Americans' wealth and power. The United States and Great Britain joined with a group of Afghan warriors called the Northern Alliance to fight the Taliban. So this map shows that presence with the war in Afghanistan during that time. And go ahead to the next slide. The Afghanistan war was extremely complicated, but this map does a remarkable job of capturing the most important components. 1, the Taliban areas in orange overlay. 2, the areas controlled by the United States and allies in depressingly tiny spots of green. 3, the major Western military bases marked with the blue dots. 4, the areas of opium production, which are a big source of Taliban funding, in brown circles, with larger circles meaning more opium. And 5, the supply lines through Pakistan in red, which Pakistan has occasionally shut down and come under frequent Taliban attack. And then finally, the supply line through Russia, which requires Russian approval. So this map is pretty depressing overall when you think about the war in its entirety. Okay, go ahead. So we'll go back to the graphic organizer. We talked about the first 2 relative certainties. So I really work with my students to pull in those other relative certainties that they've learned in the material that I've taught. And the next one would be that Saudi Arabia and Iran both support terrorist groups that fight the opposing side. So the impact of that is that ISI and ISIS in Iraq and Syria developed. Foreign groups joined the war in Syria, hoping to build an Islamic state in the region. The next relative certainty is that ISIS was so radical, it was soon at war with other factions, including the Syrian army. And then the impacts of that was that ISIS killed other Muslim terrorist groups. They were involved in massacres of innocent people and the beheading of hostages. And then the next one is that ISIS decided to take more territory in Iraq since the United States forces had withdrawn, and they said they would kill anyone who opposed them. Therefore, the Iraq army withdrew from there and didn't fight back because they knew ISIS meant business. And then finally, ISIS conquered a large part of Iraq and stole millions from its banks. Iran and the United States considered fighting ISIS together as a result. That was the impact of that. Go ahead, go on. So now we're going to look at the impacts of COVID-19 on the area today. In response to the Arab Spring and prior to COVID-19, the Gulf states financed stimulus packages and used their wealth as a bailout system for these struggling neighboring countries. But because of the pandemic, a drastic fall in oil prices, and a severe economic shutdown, these financial resources have been depleted, and the safety valve, or that safety valve for them, no longer exists. Throughout the 2010s, the Gulf monarchies sought to diversify their economies by investing in tourism, healthcare, logistics, retail, and technological and financial solutions. Their diversification efforts were slow to develop and still reliant on oil. Unfortunately, we could learn a lot from this here in Oklahoma, probably. COVID-19 will further hinder these efforts as well as affect the stability of the countries that previously enjoyed those Gulf bailouts. These poor countries may fall short in meeting their debt obligations and face even more social upheaval. The pandemic is expected to cause an additional 8.3 million to fall into poverty in those areas. This will further exacerbate those regional differences and imbalances in structure, in addition to promoting continued political upheaval, as well as weakened healthcare systems and conflict. Go ahead to the next slide. Unfortunately, besides all of that grim picture, people also use their religious authority to encourage activity that would sometimes endanger the lives of people during COVID, such as drinking cow urine in India or drinking from one spoon at Greek Orthodox churches. In the MENA region, these religious appeals often misuse the appeal of Islam to promote dangerous remedies for COVID theories and behaviors for various intentions. When COVID initially started, there were people in the MENA region using misinformation about the virus to stir Sunni Shiite animosity or trump up anti-Iranian sentiment. These perpetrators were sometimes religious authorities with ties to ruling establishments trying to attract followers or others out for monetary gains. Go ahead to the next slide. All countries are struggling with COVID-19, but the threat is even more alarming for these countries that are fragile and in conflict situations. A swift, coordinated response from the international community is necessary to avoid the worst. In addition, reform is necessary to help address the region's structural imbalances that I talked about and support their new ideas for diversification and growth. Go ahead to the next slide. So two organizations that help with that I talk about with my students are the ISAF and NATO. The ISAF is made up of over 130,000 soldiers from around 46 different countries. Troops from the different countries work together in the ISAF to keep the peace, prevent the Taliban from regaining power, and train the Afghan National Army to take on the defense of the country. One of our teachers here that I was talking to today, one of our geography teachers, his brother actually works over there to help train the Afghan army. He was talking to me about that today when I was telling him about the presentation and trying to get them to sign up. They are also known as the Coalition Forces. They are led by a group called the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, which consists of 28 North American and European countries. These countries protect and defend each other when needed. After 9/11, NATO joined with the United States to help combat terrorism. Go on to the next slide. So I pass out this primary source called Rebuilding the Peace to my students. And in the article, world reporter Roya Aziz traveled to an outpost north of Kabul where US military forces are helping to rebuild schools, clinics, and roads in the regions. And she gives her perspective of what she saw and witnessed and how they were helping out there in that region. So I'm going to share that with you, and that's also included in the packet that you'll have access to. She wrote, I arrived in the middle of the night at Bagram, the United States military base 40 minutes north of Kabul. At one of the main gates, a smiling soldier gave my backpack a cursory rummage and waved me through with an Arabic expression wishing me a good night. I know a little conversational Arabic and had half a mind to tell him he was in Afghanistan, not Iraq, but I decided to move on. Bagram is concrete and cold, a sharp contrast to the International Security Assistance Force, ISAF, headquarters in Kabul, where European and American soldiers can sit under gazebos in a grassy yard or drink real espresso in a cozy little cafe. Bagram does have tree-lined avenue, but the place is pretty much what you would expect from a base, functional and basic. There's a 2-week waiting period for journalists requesting to embed with any of the country's reconstruction teams. I had gotten word just a few days earlier that I had been approved to tag along with the Bagram Provincial Reconstruction Team, PRT. Although the Bagram PRT is part of the United States military, all PRTs in Afghanistan operate under the control of ISAF. I was shown to the Media Relations Department, where a couple of soldiers prepared my embed press pass and showed me a cot I could crash on. One of the soldiers asked me where Kabul was. He had just arrived from the United States 3 weeks earlier and would probably not leave the base. At 8 o'clock the following morning, I was scheduled to head out with a team of soldiers to deliver medical supplies to nearby villages. But by 7, it was clear that thunder and torrential rain had put the mission on hold. It wouldn't be fair to make people stand in the rain to receive the supplies, explained Captain Jessica Miller, who is in charge of public information for the Bagram PRT. In the provinces around Bagram, and you can go ahead to the next slide, where security is good, non-governmental aid groups could easily do the reconstruction and humanitarian work, but the PRTs, the brainchild of the United States government, are a key public relations tool. The aim is to convince local people that NATO, backed by the United States military, is in the country to serve, not to dominate. These reconstruction efforts are also an effective way for local governments to portray the image of a government in action working for its people. In some regions, PRTs have overseen the construction of mosques and radio stations. They also regularly deliver much needed humanitarian aid. As bad weather had put paid to seeing how these missions operate firsthand and hearing from villagers about how successful they are, I spoke instead to Colonel Donald Kohler and Major Donald Johnson, 2 United States officers in charge, about how these good works projects are organized in the province. When I arrived back in Kabul, I also spoke with outgoing ISAF spokesperson, Colonel Tom Collins, about the overall humanitarian mission in the country and how ISAF is dealing with Taliban efforts to derail the process. So when I have a discussion with the students about the type of work that they heard was going on with the ISAF in the country, as well as what they learned just about the general conditions from the reporter spending her time there in the country. You can go ahead to the next slide. And we wrap up the graphic organizer, adding the last parts about what the students learn about COVID, that the relative certainties of COVID are that the governments in the MENA region have acted quickly to contain COVID, but the impact or likely impact of that is that that COVID-19 is still causing dramatic economic and social consequences in the area, despite everything that they're trying to do to prevent it. And then also the impact or the relative certainty of the MENA region is that sometimes people use their religious authority to encourage activity that endanger people, which is unfortunate. And the impact of that is that likely more people will be affected by COVID-19, which will bring even more upheaval and uncertainty to the area. And then I have them think about the big picture, the overall underlying picture, and the key uncertainties during all of this political turmoil. And basically the key uncertainty that all of us have is that will there ever be peace there in the Middle East, or will the United States be continually relying on the Middle East oil supply and also going over to fight battles to help bail them out? So the potential consequences, of course, would be that the war would continue to drag on and that everyone worries about a nuclear armed war with Iran. And then finally, we know that here in the United States, we've heard on the news the last couple evenings that there's a potential vaccine for COVID coming soon here in the United States. But will there be a vaccine available worldwide for especially to people in that region? And so if not, the pandemic will cause further unemployment and further political turmoil and upheaval in those countries so that they can't continue to grow. And therefore there will be more unrest in those countries and it affects us as well. So we can go on to the next slide. So at this point, we've done a lot of that graphic organizer together. So I let the students fill out the final portion of their KWL chart on their own, having them write 5 sentences of what they've learned in the third column, and then how they learned in the last column. Did they learn something from the video? Did they learn, from the teacher conversation? Did they learn something from getting together in their groups and conversing with their students to create the graphic organizer? How did they learn? So does anyone have any questions so far? Okay, the next portion that I'm going to go to is ideas on enrichment for students. I have a lot of fun things that could be done for enrichment that you can do in your classrooms, or ask for the help of your core teachers or elective teachers. You can go ahead to the next slide. The first one is an excellent book that I've read with my students or had my students read together. Is called War in Afghanistan and Iraq by Janet and Jerry Souter. And once we're finished reading that, go ahead and go to the next slide. I have them participate in Socratic circles to discuss the complex text in the book. The book is an excellent resource, especially for middle school teachers. Even though it has the complex text, it also has pictures to support that text, and it really gauges their interest in what's going on over in those countries. There's questions that I've included in the resource packet for you that you can use to get them started with Socratic circles, but the whole premise of that is to get them creating their own questions. Head to the next slide. And this one is hyperlinked. Once they've read the book, I have them create an Animoto, and they do the ABCs of Afghanistan or Iraq and pretty much tell the story of what's going on over there through the alphabet. So I'm going to have you play that slide, show that was created by one of my student groups. You can just click on the picture. With the arrow as you can go full screen. Like in the picture. That's it. I would have a contest when my students created these and have them, the best ones, shared during our Veterans Day program. I'll let you get back to the slideshow. The next lesson, you might collaborate with your gifted education teacher or your STEM teacher or STEAM teacher to teach students how helicopters are used in war, and then have them create their own, do experiments with whirlybirds, which are those folded paper little like helicopters, and then have them create their own whirlybird design and see which one hovers in the air the longest. Next slide. This one you could collaborate with your art teacher and have them create geometric designs in art. And I have some samples of some that my students have done to share with you after we are finished sharing the, well, I guess everybody see my face? Okay, so here's one. They're all different, which was really cool. They would, I would teach them how to do the circles, the overlapping circles with the geometry and design, and we did the math with it. So they were finding the circumference and perimeter of the circles and area, and then have them design it afterwards by coloring it in and finding the different shapes within. And you can see how every one of them turned out to be completely different. And finally, this one. So they were pretty cool. And one more. Okay, go ahead to the next slide. And another one, another activity that you could do even in your geography classes is there's a really great book. It's kind of a controversial one called 3 Cups of Tea. Greg Mortensen wrote the book. It's controversial because he says that it is a true story, but the controversy in it is that not everything happened in the sequence that he said it happened. So afterwards, there was some investigation into it, but basically the things, it was determined that it did happen in the book, but he wrote another children's book called Listen to the Wind. So you could take that book and adapt it into a screenplay, or have your students write it into a screenplay and perform that into a little short play or a reader's theater for another class to tell them about what's going on in that country, and encourage them to maybe, our school one year sent school supplies over to the area. Okay, go ahead to the next slide. Another activity that you could do with your STEM teachers is have them design kites and learn about kite flying in Afghanistan, and competitions are a big thing over in that country. Okay, last slide. So to sum it up, the reliance of oil from the Middle East makes us deeply interested in what's going on over in that area. And until we find an alternative energy source or cut back on our own use of natural gas, We will always have a connection with them. We cannot ignore what is going on with people in war-stricken territories like the Middle East, nor can we ignore the terrorist groups that are forever threatening our security here in the United States. We must be proactive in helping out their defenseless citizens who are a target of terrorism, as well as protect our own nation against terrorism. And I love this quote by Dr. Jane Goodall. She says, "We cannot all travel to Pakistan or Afghanistan for that matter. Few people could do what Greg Mortensen has done." She's talking about the book, 3 Cups of Tea. But what we can all do, every one of us, make a difference in the world every day. So we can all basically do something small to help make a difference in the world every day. So that concludes my presentation. Does anyone have any questions about anything? Like I said, all of the resources that I talked about are included with the lesson.
Yeah, so thank you so much, Teresa. That was great. Well, leave a few minutes for questions. If you guys think of anything that you'd like to ask Teresa, feel free to jump in the chat. Teresa, I thought it was very interesting that you were talking about how
Put my computer in real quick.
religious power in that region is being wielded to undermine the public health response to COVID. And I was thinking about the parallels here in the United States and how unfortunately it's not unique to that region or anywhere else in the world.
Yes.
I also really love how you integrate other disciplines into this content. So like the art, the geometry, the math. I just think it's great. You can get, I feel like, so many more perspectives and so many more students interested in this if you're using different lens, like something that they may identify with more or relate more to. So I really appreciate you doing that for this.
Thank you.
So don't see any questions coming in, but definitely feel free to type one in the chat if you think of one here in the next couple of minutes. Yeah, thank you so much, Teresa. That was great. So while you're thinking of questions, I'll just give you guys some more information about this session and about OCAGE. So everyone who participated today is eligible to receive a PD certificate. So if you could just email me at ocage@ou.edu with your first and last name, I will send the certificate to you. I'll drop my email in the chat so you guys will have it. Okay. Our next 1-hour online PD session with Brenda will take place on Tuesday, December 8th at 4. So we hope you'll be able to attend. Our next topic will be on community level disaster preparedness and recovery. That session will be led by Heather Broucher, who is also an OCAGE teacher consultant, and Dr. Mark Schaefer with the Southern Climate Impacts Planning Program. So if your school is in person at all this year, you can still request one of our giant maps. I will drop that link in the chat if you're interested. And in addition to signing up to become a member on our website, you can also check us out on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter for additional updates. And we also now have a YouTube channel, and I will drop all of those links in the chat so you guys will have access to that as well. There you go. Oh yeah, Lynn says they had a lot of fun with the Europe and Africa map. So yeah, definitely check those out if you guys are interested. Yeah, so I guess we will go ahead and do the door prize and drawing. So let me pull up my list of participants and we'll do that. Let's see. Give me just a second to get my All right, so we've got a winner. Our winner is Lynn.
Yay. Congratulations.
Yeah. So Lynn, if you could type in the chat your first and last name, that would be good. And please also send an email to me at okage@ou.edu with your mailing address so I can mail the atlases to you. Or you can send your mailing address to me on the chat just personally, so that way not everyone has your address. So feel free to do that however you like. But yeah, that's all I have for you guys. Thank you again, Teresa. Brenda, do you have anything else that you would like to add?
No, thank everyone again. And we have our social studies general monthly meetings the first Tuesday, and geography is the second Tuesday. So hopefully that is pretty consistent. I will tell you that OCSS will be having their conference this year virtually. And so instead of in person, we'll be virtually. And it's going to be in January on successive Tuesdays. So I think it's the 12th, the 9th, whatever the 12 starts with those three. And they're going to have sessions that run at the same time, 4 or 5 sessions like you would if you were going to a conference. So you can have sessions to choose from. And I'm pretty sure we'll have geography sessions in those for you to choose from. And so probably, Becca, our January meeting will be at OCSS because it'll fall on that day. And we're going to record all of those. So just like actually it's better than going in person, because you can't, if you want to go to 3 and you can't, you now can go to all of them because we're going to record them. And I know we're going to have some national speakers that don't necessarily get to come because they're going to come virtually and join us. And so I think we're, for not being in person, not getting to see you, at least we're going to get to have really good sessions that we might not have had together. So that's something I know that we'll have some geography sessions in that. So be looking for more information about that. So the first Tuesday or the second Tuesday of the month for social studies and geography, and then in January for OCSS.
And I just wanted to say thank you again for attending this afternoon. Truly appreciate it.
I know you guys are super stressed and super busy, and seems like you never get away from your computer. So we appreciate you spending an extra hour on your computer with us this afternoon.
Yeah, thank you so much, you guys, for being here. I really appreciate it.
But I'm sure we'll hang out a couple minutes. If anybody has a question, you can just open your mic. Otherwise, we'll see you next month.
Yeah.
Which is already December. Wow.
I know.
I like Robert's background. Maybe I could join over there.
Yeah.
It seems calming.
Yeah.
It's done so nobody knows where I actually am.
I did mine because I had sun randomly coming through the window and it looked just really weird. So I put the virtual up. Yes, Eugene, the very first, I think, thing that happened after everyone was home for COVID, they sent out the Hamilton, or Lin-Manuel sent out the Hamilton and wanted everyone to have the Hamilton week. I just kept it because I think it's cool.
Nice.
Bye, guys.
All right.
Bye.
Have a good night. Bye.
Okay, well, I will end our meeting and I'll see you guys all next month.
All right. Thank
Yeah.
you guys.
Thanks,
Thank
Becca
you.
and Teresa.
It's good to see you.
Thank you.